How about the toughest schedules in the fantasy playoffs? This is according to strength of schedule tool at draftsharks.com. Check that out. The toughest schedule for the running back position in the fantasy playoffs, that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They get the Eagles in week 15. They are the 5th toughest matchup for the running back position. And this is the Ravens in week 16. They're the 9th toughest matchup for the running back position. And then the Chiefs in week 17. They are the number 1 toughest matchup for the running back position. I'm a little nervous. if I'm rostering Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren. This is already a split backfield with both of these running backs fighting for every single touch. And don't forget, Arthur Smith likes to splash in a little bit of Cordero Patterson as well. I'm nervous for both Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. This is a really, really brutal fantasy playoff schedule. Are the Chicago Bears. So good luck if you're relying on DeAndre Swift for the fantasy playoffs. I'd be nervous about that one. The third most difficult schedule in the fantasy playoffs for the running back position are the Houston Texans. The Dolphins in week 15, they're a fine matchup. I'm fine playing Joe Mixon against the Dolphins. He should do well against that. But then you get to the semifinals. Week 16, it's the Chiefs. The Chiefs are the most difficult matchup for the running back position. And the Ravens in week 17. The Ravens struggle against the passing game, but they thrive against the running game. They're a top 10 most difficult matchup for the running back position. Obviously, this is going to impact Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has been one of the best picks from the middle rounds of fantasy drafts this year. He's been fantastic. People are riding him. People who drafted Joe Mixon, they're probably already clinched the fantasy playoffs. They're in. Now, his workload has been pretty elite. He's looked as good as he has in years. Joe Mixon has been fantastic. He should be fine. Like I said, he should be fine in week 15 against the Dolphins, but I fear he's going to have a really hard time getting going in both the semifinals and the finals. These are really, really tough matchups against the Chiefs and the Ravens. Just beware. Beware of Joe Mixon if you've been riding him. Temper your expectations in those 2 weeks. The fourth most difficult schedule for the running back position in the fantasy playoffs are the Cleveland Browns. Week 15, there they are again. It's the Kansas City Chiefs, the number 1 most difficult matchup for the running back position. And it's the Bengals in week 16. They're the 8th most difficult. And the Dolphins, like I just mentioned, they're a fine matchup. I'm not worried about them. We're not getting much production out of this backfield right now anyway, to be honest with you. We're really not. It's kind of been an ugly split between 2 inefficient runners. Nick Chubb has looked like a shell of his former self, and Jerome Ford needs volume to produce meaningful fantasy production. They're a complete stay away in week 15 against the Chiefs. I don't want any Browns running backs in the fantasy playoffs. Don't want them. The 5th most difficult schedule for the running back position in the fantasy playoffs are the Buffalo Bills. Week 15, it's the Lions. They are the 2nd most difficult matchup for the running back position. That's the Patriots in week 16. The Patriots, you can take advantage of the Patriots. They're not a tough match. The Jets in week 17 in the fantasy championship week, they are the 11th most difficult matchup for the running back position. The Lions have been one of the stingiest defenses against the run all season. They're going to see them in week 15. Part of that is because they're just good, for one, but also the Detroit offense is so good that they force opposing teams to throw the ball more than they would like to. So I would be nervous as a James Cook manager for week 15. However, week 16, week 17, I really wouldn't hesitate to roll them out there despite those matchups. The Patriots, they're not a difficult matchup to begin with, like I said. And the Bills running backs combined for 131 rushing yards against the Jets back in week 6. So despite the tough matchup, we've already seen them succeed against the Jets. That makes me feel better. It does. All right. The most difficult wide receiver schedule in the fantasy playoffs, that's the Detroit Lions. The Lions have the toughest schedule in the fantasy playoffs for wide receivers. Week 15, it's the Bills, who are the 11th most difficult matchup for the position. The Bears in week 16, they are the third most difficult matchup for wide receivers. And it's the 49ers, who are the second most difficult matchup for wide receivers. They're going to get them in the fantasy championship round. This is going to impact Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's going to impact Jameson Williams. Obviously, we're not sitting a stud like Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I would be concerned about Jameson Williams, particularly in an outdoor road matchup against the Bears in week 16. And given how often Amon-Ra St. Brown lines up in the slot, it's likely we're going to see Jameson Williams get a lot of Jalen Johnson in that matchup as well. So while I'm not benching Amon-Ra St. Brown in these games, I'm probably benching Jameson Williams in week 16 against the Bears. Don't play him in that game. That is one of these that I feel the most confident. Don't play Jameson Williams in week 16. Find somebody else for the semifinals. The second most difficult schedule for the wide receiver position in the fantasy playoffs are the Los Angeles Rams. They get the 49ers in week 15. They're the second most difficult matchup for the position. The Jets were the fourth most difficult. They get them in week 16. And the Cardinals in week 17. They're the 13th most difficult matchup for the position. Players impacted by this are going to be Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and maybe a little Demarcus Robinson if you've been playing him at all. Probably not, though. I wouldn't recommend sitting either Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua, but you may want to at least temper your expectations. They're both very, very capable of overcoming tough matchups. So I'm not too worried about this, but just at least be aware. Temper your expectations slightly for Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in the fantasy playoffs. And the third most difficult wide receiver schedule in the fantasy playoffs, that goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars play the Jets in week 15. They're the fourth most difficult matchup for the position. That's the Raiders in week 16. They're the 10th most difficult. And the Titans in week 17, they are the seventh most difficult matchup for the position. That's going to impact Brian Thomas Jr. and Parker Washington. It's going to be a tough stretch for Jacksonville pass catchers, especially if they're quarterbacked by Mac Jones. The fourth most difficult playoff schedule for the wide receiver position, that goes to the Minnesota Vikings. They get the Bears in week 15, the Seahawks in week 16, and the Packers, who are the ninth most difficult matchup for the wide receiver position, that they get them in week 17, fantasy championship week. Of course, Vikings wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. No one is sitting Justin Jefferson, no matter the matchup. And Jordan Addison, he's been kind of hot over the last several weeks. Now, both of these guys had more than 70 receiving yards and a touchdown earlier this season against the Packers. So I'm not worried about that matchup too much. However, just 2 weeks ago against the Bears, Justin Jefferson got the Jalen Johnson treatment. He was held to 2 catches for 27 yards in that game. So while we're not sitting Justin Jefferson, I'd be nervous if I'm playing him and relying on him in week 15. Hopefully you secure that first round bye this week so you don't have to worry about that. Now, in that same game, while Justin Jefferson was getting the Jalen Johnson treatment, Jordan Addison was taking full advantage on the other side. He caught 8 of 9 targets for 162 yards and a touchdown. So maybe, despite the difficult matchup, you might actually want to fire up Jordan Addison in week 15 against the Bears. See if you can take advantage of that again. Now, the fifth most difficult schedule for the wide receiver position in the fantasy playoffs, that is the Indianapolis Colts. They get the Broncos in week 15, Titans in week 16. They're the 7th most difficult matchup for the position. And then it's the Giants in week 17. They're the 8th most difficult matchup for the wide receiver position. This is going to impact Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Adonai Mitchell. Now, Anthony Richardson, He's played better, but he's still throwing like a below average quarterback. That's not going to bode well for a road matchup against Patrick Surtain in week 15. That's not going to be good. Now, it was Joe Flacco at the helm when they last saw the Titans earlier in the season, but he was held to 189 yards and only one Colts pass catcher was able to even reach 50 yards in that game. That was Josh Downs. He got to 66. But I'm very fearful if I'm relying on Colts wide receivers for the fantasy playoffs. This is going to be a difficult stretch for them.